This 7-inch Brooke rifle is displayed at White Point Garden, commonly called the Battery, in Charleston, South Carolina. Weighing nearly 15,000 pounds, 7-inch Brookes were some of the most formidable and dangerous weapons the U.S. Navy faced when confronting Confederate fortifications and warships during the American Civil War. This 7-inch Brooke has been displayed at White Point Garden since around 1901. It was cast in Selma, Alabama in 1864 and shipped to Charleston near the end of 1864. Brooke rifles were designed by John Mercer Brooke, an officer who had resigned the U.S. Navy and joined the Confederate Navy at the beginning of the Civil War. The first Brooke rifles were manufactured by Traeger Foundry in Richmond, Virginia, for the ironclad CSS Virginia. These Brookes were used in action against USS Monitor in March of 1862, and shot marks from Virginia's Brooke rifles can still be seen in the recovered turret of USS Monitor. The Brooke rifle was designed to be used aboard the warships of the Confederate Navy and was configured for mounting on naval carriages. It could fire a variety of projectiles, including explosive shells, grape-shot canister, and solid wrought iron armor-piercing bolts. It was constructed by taking a cast iron tube and heat-shrinking wrought iron reinforcing rings in a band on the breech. As such, it strongly resembles the Parrott rifles produced for the U.S. Army and Navy in West Point, New York. Several of these Parrott rifles can be seen mounted today at Fort Sumter and Fort Moultrie near Charleston. Brooke rifles have a hook slant rifling cut into their cast iron barrels. The first Brooke rifles in Charleston were single-banded models, one of the Navy type and one of the Army type that had a flat, ratcheted breech like an Army Columbiad. Both were mounted at Fort Sumter just prior to the attack of the U.S. Navy in April 1863, where they proved to be very effective in firing upon the ironclads. The monitors of the U.S. Navy would carry dents in their turrets for the rest of their careers from the Columbiads and Brookes that fired upon them off of Charleston. The Brooke rifle at the Battery in Charleston is a double-banded Brooke, meaning that it has two wrought iron bands heat-shrunk onto the breech to reinforce it. The Brooke was cast at the Selma Naval Ordnance Works in 1864. It is marked with the foundry number S76 in several places, although these are currently covered with layers of paint. The Brooke was shipped to Charleston, specifically to the Naval Squadron there, in September of 1864. However, it seems to have served at Fort Johnson on James Island. At least this is where it was recovered in 1901, according to a News and Courier article of the time. Fort Johnson, by 1865, mounted two 7-inch Brooke rifles. One of these is pictured in a set of photographs taken at the fort after Confederate surrender in 1865. Whether the Brooke at the Battery is the same one pictured at Fort Johnson in the 1865 photos, it's a 50-50 chance. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. The Brooke has for generations faced south overlooking Murray Boulevard. Its original emplacement was facing to the east in what is now the roadway of East Battery. It also originally had the lower component of its carriage, which is a wrought iron U.S. Army model for a somewhat smaller Parrott rifle. The Brooke can be seen in the background of this circa 1910 photo, which looks down what is now Murray Boulevard. In the background is a 3-masted schooner. If you look to the left, you can see some of the 13-inch mortars on display at White Point Garden. The Brooke rifle at White Point Garden, S76, is not the only Brooke on display in the Charleston area. The lone surviving triple-banded Brooke is displayed at Fort Moultrie. There's a double-banded 7-inch Brooke rifle that is on display at the Citadel. It is highly corroded. It was recovered from the wreck of a Confederate ironclad in the 1920s. It's also very likely that another 7-inch double-banded Brooke is buried at Castle Pinckney. It was photographed at the end of the war, and excavations at the castle in recent years have found 2 of the 10-inch Columbiads known to be there, but the 7-inch Brooke is yet to be found. It's likely still in the fort. Visitors to White Point Garden may not realize they are walking through a Civil War-era fort that was built on the site, and the display that was put in place around the year 1900 seems to have intentionally recalled the armament of that fort. The individual perhaps most responsible for the display was John Johnson, who during the war had been an engineer officer in the Confederate Army. In the 1880s, wrote a book on the defense of Charleston, and by that time he was serving as the rector of St. Philip's Church. The focus of my page is on the U.S. Navy and its sailors during the 19th century, especially during the American Civil War. The forts and ships armed with weapons such as this 7-inch Brooke Rifle S76 were formidable opponents, and to me, this 7-inch Brooke at White Point Garden is a monument to the U.S. Navy and its sailors and the victory it achieved during the war.